Hey everyone, Crow back again with another Evercade video. This time we're going to be looking at Worms Collection 1. Worms is a long-running series brought to us by Team 17. They make a lot of other games, but I believe like the Worms franchise, maybe their biggest. There are a lot of games in this series, from the classic Worms titles, 3D Worms titles, and Worms spin-off games. There's just so many of them. But there's only 3 of them in this cartridge. And primarily, I think the reason for that is because a lot of the Worms games, I think the series started out on the Amiga, and it was like, it has been ported to a lot of systems since then. But the majority of the Worms games were on personal computers. A lot of the Worms games are on Steam these days. Very few of the titles actually made their way to consoles. And unfortunately, that's all we're really getting on Evercade so far. So these 3 Worms games we're going to be talking about are all the console versions of Worms games. So yeah, there's 3 of them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk briefly about each one of them. I'm going to give them a score between 1 and 5. A 5 is what I consider to be a great game, a game I had a lot of fun with, saw very little flaws with. A 4 is what I consider to be a good game, a game I still liked, but has some flaws that I felt could be corrected or changed to make the game even better. A 3 is what I consider to be an okay game. It's a game that I'm kind of in the middle on. I neither really like it nor dislike it. A 2 is what I consider to be a poor game. It's a game I did not like, but I feel like maybe there's a reason to go back and play it. Maybe there's, it's just bad because I didn't like it. Maybe somebody else out there does like it. And a 1 is what I consider to be a bad game. It's a game that I do not like at all. I don't believe it should ever have been put on the Evercade. And of course, these scores are my own personal preferences. Your mileage may vary. You may think a game is great, while I do not. And also, I'm ranking these games based how they play on the Evercade and not the original consoles or systems they were put out for. So, with all that said, let's get started with our first game in Worms Collection 1. The first game in this collection is a port of the first game in the Worms series, simply titled Worms. The game was originally released on the Amiga in 1995, but was then ported to several other platforms, including the SNES, the Game Boy, Sega Saturn, DOS, Macintosh, and PlayStation 1. The port included in this collection, however, is the Sega Mega Drive version, which was only released in Europe. I'll talk more about this in a bit, but first I'll describe what this game is. At its core, the series is an artillery game. An artillery game is a game in which 2 or more players take turns firing weapons at one another by choosing the angle and power of your shot, causing your projectile to arc across the map, hopefully striking your target. In Worms, you are saddled with a team of up to 4 worms up against 1 to 3 other teams. At the start of each game, the terrain is generated and the worms are randomly placed across the terrain. Each of the teams take turns, with 1 worm being controllable during that turn. The worms on each team are selected in order, so during a team's turn, the playable worm is the one next on the team's roster from the worm that was moved during the last turn. Each worm has a time limit to fire a weapon, but before firing can move and jump around to get a better shot if needed. A weapon is then selected and fired. The damage is assessed and the turn ends. The turn can also end if the player elects to skip their turn or the worm is injured while moving around the map. There are several weapons that a worm can use during the game. Some are limited, and some have infinite uses. Common weapons are the bazooka, which is affected by the wind, and grenades, which are not affected by the wind but bounce around after landing. There are also cluster bombs, shotgun, Uzis, dynamite, and airstrikes that can be called in. The worm can also get hands-on by performing a fire punch, throwing a Dragon Ball, or even sacrificing itself in a kamikaze attack. Or you can choose not to attack, but better position yourself on the map by using a drill, a blowtorch, or a teleportation device on your turn. As you play, crates may appear on the map, and having your worm collect one may grant you access to a Gatling gun, banana bomb, or a sheep. And these are the most deadly weapons in the game. I find the gameplay and strategy extremely fun, and it's a great multiplayer game. And since the game is turn-based, you can all play with one controller by passing it around. This is the first time I've ever played this game, the first in the series, so there were a couple things I didn't like in this version. The total health for the teams is at the top of the screen, and that would be fine except when the camera pans down, you can't see it anymore. You can only move the camera on your turn, so you have to wait for your turn to see that info. Also, if you want to look around to see where you want to fire, the camera will always move back to the center of your worms, so sometimes you may be firing blind. Now let's talk about this Mega Drive port that's on this collection, because there are some issues I have with it. Firstly, the game audio is pretty inconsistent. Some sounds are way louder than others, and for some reason it seems like the audio kept dropping out entirely at times. Secondly, usually all the names above the worms are color-coded, so you know what worm is on which team. But for some reason, all the names are white on this version, making it so you have to memorize which worm is on what team. Another odd thing is that the screenshot the Evercade uses in its menu for this game is from the Amiga version, and it's not from this version. Well, at least I think it's the Amiga version. At any rate, it's definitely not the Mega Drive version. But for the negatives I had with this port of the first game in this Worms series, I still had a lot of fun playing it. And I kept playing it round after round after round. Because of this, I can't say it's anything but good and give it a 4. I just don't know why they didn't put the SNES version of this game on this collection instead. I would say why not the PlayStation 1 version, but there probably isn't enough space on the cartridge with the other games included. Game 2 in this collection of 3 is Worms Armageddon from 1999, and I'll say straight out that this is easily the highlight of the cartridge. This was the Worms game I was introduced to during a LAN party in college, and I've always held high interest in the series since then. Some will say that this is still the best game in this series to date. The version of the game in this collection is the PlayStation 1 version, and while it doesn't have all the features of the PC version I was used to playing, it's pretty damn close. Now, this is actually the third game in the Worms series, and as such, it's a massive improvement over the first game. There are more terrain options, the ability to change the worm's speech, more game options, and perhaps best of all, a massive increase to your weapon arsenal, which now includes things like landmines, super sheep, mad cows, and holy hand grenades. The worms are also now more maneuverable with 2 different types of jumps, the ability to use ropes and jetpacks, and also the ability to move for a little bit of time after firing your weapon, and that really comes in handy. You also get access to training modes and missions to bulk up the single-player content. It's a much more robust game than the original, and you're in for something different each round you play. Now, I mentioned that this PlayStation version doesn't include all the features of the PC version, but it's honestly not much. In the PC version, I do remember being able to assign each Worms team a different speech bank, but here the speech bank selected applies to all teams. Also, I remember being able to make my own speech banks using my own audio files, but it's completely understandable that this wouldn't be in the PlayStation 1 version. The one thing I found kind of bizarre was missing were flames of any kind. There are oil barrels littered across the maps, and in the PC version, when they exploded, they emitted embered flames that would blow in the wind and stick to the ground for a few rounds, injuring any worms that wound up touching them, and also tossing them around until they were no longer in contact with them. In this version, the barrels explode, but there are no longer flames. Also, any weapons that involve these ember flames are missing from the game entirely as well. No carpet bombs or Molotov cocktails in this version of the game. But that's all I can remember that's actually missing. The rest of it is all here, and surprisingly, the PlayStation 1 version actually supports a 16:9 aspect ratio. It's anamorphic, however, so you'll have to change the Evercade display setting to full screen, but it totally works great when it's set up properly, and it finally gives a reason to use the full screen display setting in the Evercade, which always seemed like a terrible idea in the past. So despite this version of the game missing some things, it's so minor that I won't hesitate giving this game a 5. Absolutely a great game, and I wouldn't be surprised if this winds up being my most played game on the Evercade. Well, that's 2 of the games in this Worms collection. Before we get to the last one, I do ask that if you are liking this video, please do give it a thumbs up. Thanks. The third and final game in this collection is Worms Blast, which was released in 2002. This is a spin-off puzzle game from the Worms series and was also available on several different platforms. I personally used to own this game on the GameCube, but the version available here in this collection is the Game Boy Advance version, which was only released in Europe. The game at first glance seems like it may be like Puzzle Bobble, and in some respects it is. But it goes a bit further in gameplay diversity. You've got the colored bubbles in the air, and you control a worm in a boat that will fire different colored missiles at these bubbles. If your missile matches the color of the bubble and all the connected bubbles of the same color will disappear. If it's a different color, that bubble and the surrounding bubbles will change to the color of your missile. If that was it, I feel like that would be enough. But you're in a boat, so moving left or right will move the boat. And let's not forget that this is a Worms game, so pushing up and down will alter the trajectory of your shot, and holding down the fire button alters the shot's strength. So unlike most puzzle games of this type, it's entirely possible to fire a shot that arcs up and over some bubbles and hits another bubble from behind. There are also some crates that can be destroyed and alternate weapons that can be collected. The goals of each stage can vary wildly as well. You may have to clear all the bubbles in a certain time limit, or maybe just one specific target, or prevent certain bubbles from falling, or avoid all falling bubbles, or collect falling stars. There's simply an overwhelming variety of tasks to accomplish in this game. I think the game is just too overcomplicated for its own good. When you start the game, it asks if you want to play the tutorial stages, so I said yes. Why not learn a little bit about the game before playing? 30 minutes later, I was still playing the tutorial stages. The amount of stuff it was throwing at me was kind of ridiculous. I think puzzle games work best when they are kept simple and straight to the point, but I feel that this game keeps changing things up too frequently to get comfortable with any sort of playstyle. It's kind of the reason I got rid of the game when I used to have it on the GameCube. I lost interest in it pretty quickly, and the same thing happened here with this version of the game. I don't necessarily think it's a bad game, I just can't get into it, which is why I'll say it's just okay and give it a 3. And there you go, those are the 3 games in this Worms collection, and I'd like to rank these games from my least favorite to my most favorite, although you probably already know what they are because I gave them all different scores. But my least favorite is, of course, Worms Blast. I gave it a 3. I thought it was just okay. I couldn't really get into this puzzle game. I've had it in the past, and again, I sold it off. I really didn't like it, and this is an inferior version to the version I did have back then. So to me, it's just like, man, I kind of, whatever. My second favorite in this collection, the one in the middle, is Worms. And of course, it would be in the middle if it was any version, I think. But again, the Genesis/Mega Drive version may be the worst port of the game to put on this. I don't know why they didn't go with the Super Nintendo version. Of course, the PS version of this title, Worms, may be too big for the cartridge, especially since the other Worms game that is on this. And I'm glad they went with this one. But again, I didn't think I'd like it, but I couldn't stop playing it regardless. And then my number 1 choice on this cartridge is, of course, Worms Armageddon, the PS1 port. Not as good as the PC version that I used to play way back in the day, but good enough to where it now is my favorite game on the Evercade, period, over all other collections. Worms Armageddon, it's probably going to be the cartridge that's going to remain in my Evercade if don't have anything else I'm playing, because I just love picking it up and playing it. Yeah, I love Worms Armageddon. The PlayStation version is slightly inferior to the PC version, but still good enough to where I really, really like it. Well, there you go. That is Worms Collection 1. And you know what? I completely forgot to look up what the next collection is because I don't have it yet. Let me take a look and I'll get right back to you. All right, I've just looked it up and it looks like it's going to be cartridge number 19, the Codemasters Collection 1. I think this is one a lot of people have been looking forward to, and it looks like it's getting released at the end of August, so I probably already have this cartridge by the time this video comes out, so might not be too long before I get to this one. So, until next time, see you then. Bye.